It's past midnight on a dirt back road in the Appalachian Hills. A Ford coupe flies through the darkness with its headlights off, engine screaming. In the front seat, a driver grips the wheel, eyes fixed ahead, trunk sloshing full of liquid gold or illegal moonshine whiskey. Behind him, there's trouble. A federal agent's sedan giving chase, red siren lights spinning furiously in the distance. The driver's heart pounds. If he's caught, he's facing handcuffs. Or maybe a bullet. But he didn't soup up this V8 Ford just to get caught. He downshifts, stomps the gas. The gap widens. Dust and moonlight cloak the road as he deftly slides around the hairpin turn, leaving the revenuer in the weeds. Tonight, speed and nerve make the difference between a payday and prison. This is the life for a bootlegger in the American South during Prohibition, running whiskey and outrunning the law. It's dangerous, it's illegal, and it's the birth of something much bigger than he knows. Our story begins on these twisting back roads of the 1930s, with outlaw drivers and devil-may-care moonshiners. It leads to roaring speedway crowds and the glint of easy money. And eventually, it catches the sharp eyes of organized crime. The mob is about to get its first glimpse of NASCAR. From Slingshot Racing Media, I'm Ellis Thomas, and this is Fast Money, NASCAR, and the Mafia-Connection, where we dive into the unbelievable, a true story of how NASCAR's beloved stock car racing was fueled by outlaw whiskey and later brushed up against the dark world of organized crime. This is Episode 1, Moonshine, Money, and the First Glimpse. Each episode will peel back another layer of this hidden history, tale of fast cars and even faster cash, of backroad bandits and big city mob bosses, all on a collision course. In today's episode, we'll set the stage in the rip-roaring days of Prohibition and the chaotic rise of stock car racing. We'll see how Southern moonshine runners became racing's first heroes, how NASCAR was born in the aftermath, and how, by the 1950s, the rumble of stock car engines drew attention of some very unsavory characters lurking in the shadows. In 1920, the United States outlawed alcohol. The Prohibition era had begun, and with it came an explosion of underground liquor and crime. A historian once quipped, "Prohibition practically created organized crime in America." Mob bosses like Al Capone built empires on bootleg booze. But it wasn't just big city gangsters getting rich. Down south, a different breed of outlaw emerged, the moonshine runner. These were rural folks, farmers, mechanics, good old boys, who realized there was fast money to be made by hauling White Lightning whiskey across dry county lines. They needed two things to succeed: stealth and speed. Stealth to cook whiskey in secret stills hidden deep in the woods, and speed to outrun the law when it came time to deliver the goods. They got creative. By the late 1920s and 30s, moonshiners were modifying ordinary cars into midnight road rockets. They'd do a couple things. They would strip out seats and floorboards to hide jugs of moonshine and reduce the weight. They'd beef up the engines, especially after 1932, when Ford introduced a powerful flathead V8 engine that quickly became the smuggler's favorite. Heavy-duty suspension springs went in to support all those gallons of whiskey sloshing around in the trunk. Some clever runners even rigged James Bond-style tricks, like pipes to dump oil or nails on the road behind them, smoke screens from the exhaust, and steel plates behind the grille to stop police bullets. With these Frankenstein hot rods, drivers would blaze down twisting county roads at night, often blacking out their headlights to avoid detection. It took nerves of steel and outrageous driving skill. Every run was a high-speed gamble. Lose the law, you get paid. Get caught, you go to jail. Junior Johnson, a name you're going to hear a lot in the story, was one of those young drivers. He grew up in Wilkes County, North Carolina, where the mountains brimmed with hidden stills. Junior later became a NASCAR legend, but he started out as a moonshine runner, and he put it best. Moonshiners put more time, energy, and thought, as well as love into their cars than any racer ever will, he said. Lose on the track and you go home. Lose to a load of whiskey and you go to jail. Those stakes bred incredible drivers, men who could drift around a bend on a muddy one-lane road at 90 miles an hour in the dead of night without crashing or getting caught. In the South, they earned folk hero status, legends whispered about at pools and barbershops. By the early 1930s, even before Prohibition ended, these moonshine runners started doing something on their off nights, racing each other. Think about it, they already had the fastest cars and they knew how to handle them. Why not find out who was truly the fastest? So on Sunday afternoons, after a long week of risky runs, they'd gather in open fields or fairground dirt tracks and race. For bragging rights, maybe a little cash, locals could hear the engines roar and would come running to watch. It was raw, it was outlaw, and it was incredibly exciting. The cars looked stock, like regular family coupes, but under the hood, they were anything but. A writer for Whiskey Advocate magazine put it this way: early stock car races were supposed to feature unmodified passenger cars, but in truth, many were secret hot rods built for hauling moonshine. It was in these impromptu contests that nascent stars emerged. In North Georgia, a moonshiner named Lightning Lloyd Seay wowed crowds with his fearless driving, and won so much that he was dubbed one of the best stock car drivers anyone had ever seen. His cousin, Roy Hall, another ex-bootlegger, dominated races in the late 30s and early 40s. These men were rough around the edges, maybe on the wrong side of the law by the weekday, but on race day, they were heroes to thousands of cheering fans. When national prohibition was repealed in 1933, you might think the party ended. It didn't, not in the South. Sure, legal alcohol was back, but plenty of counties stayed dry, and more importantly, the federal government still taxed liquor. Moonshiners simply kept cooking to avoid those taxes. Throughout the 1940s, running moonshine remained a lucrative, if perilous, business, and thus the pool of daredevil drivers remained flush with talent. If it hadn't been for all that illegal whiskey, stock car racing might never have taken off. If it hadn't been for whiskey, NASCAR wouldn't have been formed. That's a fact, Junior Johnson mused decades later. He wasn't wrong. Whiskey money and whiskey runners built the foundation of America's most popular racing sport. And soon, the savvy promoter was about to turn this free-for-all into an organized phenomenon. Let's jump to Daytona Beach, Florida, December 14th, 1947. We're now a few years past World War II. In a rooftop hotel bar by the ocean, a group of men gather amid a haze of cigar smoke and the clink of bourbon glasses. These men are racers, car owners, promoters, and quite a few are former bootleggers. They've come at the invitation of one William Big Bill France, a towering, barrel-chested ex-mechanic who ran a local track. France has a bold vision: to tame the chaos of stock car racing and make it a professional sport. They meet in the Ebony Room at the Streamline Hotel, a swanky Art Deco lounge that, incidentally, had hosted mobster Al Capone during the war years. A little hint of the underworld brushing shoulders with racing's founders. France lays out his plans: a sanctioning body with uniform rules, scheduled championship races, and an image cleanup for a sport often seen as just backwoods ruffians tearing up cow pastures. Over 4 days, the men hashed it out. Almost 40 people came and went during those meetings. Officially, they listed themselves as mechanics, businessmen, drivers. Unofficially, many were moonshine kings. You'll notice that Bootleggers is not on that list of occupations, journalist Ryan McGee noted wryly, because pretty much all of them were. They just didn't want to shout it out loud. One attendee was Raymond Parks, a soft-spoken liquor baron from Georgia who had parlayed moonshine money into a successful racing team. He later recalled the scene. "We looked like a cleaned-up bunch of men who knew exactly what we were doing," Parks said. "In reality, we were a bunch of characters all there hoping to straighten some things out. If we didn't, fine. We'd go back to what we were doing before." What they were doing before? He means running whiskey. These founders knew that if this experiment failed, the likes of Parks, Hall, and Johnson would just shrug, load their trunks of moonshine, and hit the back roads again. But it didn't fail. In February of 1948, Bill France's new organization, the National Association for Stock Car Auto Racing, better known as NASCAR, held its first official race on the sands of Daytona. The winner was Red Byron, driving a modified Ford. Red Byron had been an Air Force gunner in the war, but before that, he too ran moonshine for Raymond Parks. In fact, Byron would go on to win NASCAR's first championship that same year, driving for Parks and funded by liquor money. NASCAR brought structure to the sport, but it didn't wash away its outlaw roots overnight. Early races were still dominated by former bootleggers with something to prove. In June of 1949, at NASCAR's inaugural strictly stock race in Charlotte, a driver named Glenn Dunaway crossed the finish line first. Dunaway's car was owned by Hubert Westmoreland, who, naturally, was a well-known moonshine runner. When inspectors checked the car, they found the rear springs had been altered, reinforced for hauling heavy loads of whiskey. In other words, Dunaway had raced with his bootlegger springs still on. NASCAR disqualified him on the spot for not being truly stock. Westmoreland was actually so mad he sued NASCAR for the win, but a judge tossed out the case. The second-place driver Jim Roper was declared the victory, and a clear message was sent. The old moonshine tricks wouldn't fly on NASCAR's watch. Still, many early NASCAR winners had moonshine in their veins. The Flock brothers, Fonte and Tim, hauled a legal hooch before becoming NASCAR champions. Future Hall of Famer Junior Johnson honed his driving outrunning sheriff's deputies in the Carolina Hills, and he didn't even make his NASCAR debut until 1955, after a stint in federal prison for moonshining. In fact, in NASCAR's first decade, an estimated half of the drivers had done some whiskey running, or so the lore goes. The tracks were filled with colorful characters who had lived on the edge, and fans ate it up. By the 1950s, stock car racing was shedding its outlaw reputation, just enough to explode in popularity. Big Bill France ran NASCAR with an iron hand, ensuring races were relatively fair, promoting the events like crazy, and keeping a wholesome spin for the press. But everyone knew the subtext. Famous writer Tom Wolfe later wrote that stock car racing had run on moonshine, and the early heroes were whiskey trippers with 200 proof courage. It was during this booming era, crowds growing, new tracks opening, that another group outside the sport started paying attention. Not the feds or the state police. It was organized crime, the mafia, the mob. Let's paint the national picture for a moment. It's the early 1950s. The war is over. America is prosperous. and Las Vegas is lighting up the Nevada desert. Illegal gambling is rampant, coast to coast, despite crackdowns. In 1951, Senator Estes Kefauver's televised hearings on organized crime have exposed the American public to the breadth of Mafia's operations, from New York to Florida to Hollywood. The mob's main racket? Gambling. In New York and Chicago, illegal bookies handle bets on horse racing, boxing, baseball, you name it. The mob controls many of these operations, pulling in huge profits off the books. If people want to wager, and the law won't let them, the Mafia happily will. By 1950, as one historian put it, the Mafia's ominous silhouette loomed over most of the country, with syndicates muscling into any enterprise that smelled of money, especially gambling. Meanwhile, down in the South, NASCAR is on fire. What started as a regional hobby is turning into a bona fide sports attraction. Big crowds are showing up to watch their local idols race stock cars on dirt and asphalt ovals. How big? On Labor Day 1950, the brand new Darlington Raceway in South Carolina hosted the first Southern 500, the big event of the year. They expected maybe 10,000 people. More than 25,000 fans showed up, overflowing the stands. From the Blue Ridge foothills to the Florida beaches, tens of thousands of Southerners are flocking to races every week by the mid-1950s. And wherever crowds gather, money flows. Tickets, concessions, souvenirs, and betting. Now, gambling at the racetrack was nothing new. At horse tracks, betting was the whole point. But at stock car races, there was no legal betting. States weren't about to sanction wagering on what was still seen as a rowdy, crash-filled spectacle. That didn't stop gambling, though. Fans would bet amongst themselves, passing cash in the bleachers. Local bookmakers, operating illegally, took bets under the table. At small-town tracks, sheriffs often knew it was happening and looked the other way, or maybe even got a cut. To the big crime syndicates up north, this was interesting. Here was a sport exploding in popularity, but without the legal oversight and security of, say, big horse racing venues. In other words, ripe territory for illegal betting rings. A crafty mob-connected bookie could swoop in and start making serious dough off these races, especially the marquee ones. Picture a hot summer day in 1950 at a dusty North Carolina fairgrounds track. The grandstands are packed, women fanning themselves in the heat, men with rolled-up sleeves smoking Lucky Strikes. The cars are lined up at the start, engines rumbling, and moving through the crowd is a heavy-set man in a sharp suit, a New York accent, and an eye for odds. He's not cheering. He's whispering in a patron's ear, taking a folded bill and jotting numbers in a little notebook. He moves on to the next group of fans, then the next, doing the same. By race's end, he's collected a small fortune in bets. That man is a bookmaker, and locals who've seen his type before might quietly mention he's connected, Mafia-connected. Perhaps he's come down from New York or Chicago specifically because he's heard about this booming race scene. Perhaps he's even working for a larger syndicate, testing the waters. This exact scene is a bit of speculation, but it's grounded in the truth of the era. We know that by the mid-1950s, organized crime figures were circling NASCAR's periphery. The FBI and local law enforcement had begun to notice gamblers, known from out of state, were showing up on race days. One Senate investigation later revealed that a prominent gambling syndicate had tentacles in the South, operating betting rings at sporting events. It would make perfect sense that stock car races, with no legal betting to compete with, were prime targets. But not everyone was on board with that. In fact, One man was determined to slam the door on any gangland influence. Big Bill France himself. France had fought hard to legitimize NASCAR, to shake off that outlaw stigma enough to attract mainstream sponsors and respect. The idea of mafiosi sneaking into his grandstands to run betting scams made his blood boil. He feared it would tarnish the sport's image and drive families and respectable fans away, not to mention invite corruption, race fixing, or violence. Bill France's worries weren't paranoia. In those years, headlines were full of scandals about fixed boxing matches, point shaving in college sports, all tied to illegal betting rings run by organized crime. France was determined NASCAR would not be next. So when whispers of mob-connected bookies at Southern tracks reached Bill France's ears, he reacted in trademark fashion, with force. He started quietly working with local police to spot and ban known gamblers at the gates. And he made his stance public in no uncertain terms. In 1954, after an anonymous tip about a betting ring operation at a race, France told a reporter that he would sooner shut down his biggest speedway than let gangsters set up shop there. A few years later, as the pressure really mounted, he thundered in a statement, "Organized gambling would be bad for our sport and would spill innocent blood on our racetrack. I'll fight it to the end. And with the help of all decent auto racing people and their fans, we will lick it." Big Bill was not just whistling Dixie. He meant every word of it. If the Mafia wanted a piece of NASCAR, they would have to go through him. By the end of the 1950s, stock car racing was firmly established as a Southern institution. NASCAR had a national champion each year, new paved superspeedways were being built, and stars like Lee Petty and Fireball Roberts were becoming household names. Financially, the sport was inching towards the big leagues, and whenever big money is on the line, the interest of organized crime is never far behind. The mob's first glimpse of NASCAR through those early betting forays was just the beginning. In smoky back rooms up north, some mobsters started thinking, how else could they get in on the action? Could races be fixed to guarantee betting payouts? Could popular drivers be leaned on to throw a race or carry mob money? Could a team or even an entire track be bought with laundered cash? These possibilities were tantalizing to a criminal underworld always seeking new ventures. And for a few NASCAR insiders, the lure of easy money brought temptation to their doorstep. The stage was set for a collision between two very different American passions, fast cars and fast cash. NASCAR's rebellious roots had made it wildly popular, but they also left cracks that clever criminals might exploit. As the 1950s turned into the 60s, the paths of stock car racing and the Mafia began to intersect in daring and sometimes dangerous ways. In this first episode, we saw how Moonshine runners and race promoters built NASCAR from the ground up, and how the mob took notice of this burgeoning goldmine of a sport. But the real intrigue was only just beginning. The mob doesn't just watch opportunities, it moves in on them. And in our next episode, move in it did. Next time on Fast Money, we'll follow the trail of mobsters and bookies as they attempt to sink their claws into stock car racing. FBI files and undercover agents, fixed races, and secret payoffs. Even a driver's strike that brought NASCAR to the brink. You'll hear how a NASCAR champion found himself indebted to a New York crime boss, and how a union backed by none other than Jimmy Hoffa tried to wrest control of the sport, threatening to bring Bill France to his knees. The Mafia's gambling rings circle NASCAR like sharks, until France and the federal G-men unite to fight back. It's a showdown of epic proportions. The good old boys versus the good fellas. You won't want to miss it. I'm Ellis Thomas for Slingshot Racing Media. Thank you for joining me on this ride for episode 1 of Fast Money, NASCAR and the Mob Connection. Strap in, because this race is only getting started.